Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Puppet Time Online, brought to you by the Puppet Kitchen. I'm your host, Eric Wright. This is Puppet Time Online. This is your chance to sit down with some of the puppetry community's finest and me, and to hear about what they know about. As always, I've got Katie here helping to produce the show.
Hi.
She is there to catch all of your questions and comments. So if you have anything you want to join in the conversation, you want to say, or questions that you want to ask me or my guest, put them in the comments section. We're on YouTube, so I think the comments are there, and on Facebook Live, where comments are over here, and on Twitch, I think they're also over here too. So welcome everybody, and thanks for watching. I'm super excited to have our next guest on today. He's a dear friend of mine from way back from when I started my puppetry career. After, I guess we met right after graduating, right after I graduated Sarah Lawrence College. And he's an incredible puppeteer, a designer, performer, and teacher. So everyone, please welcome Tom Lee. Hi, Tom.
Hi, is this where puppetry's finest are located?
That's some of them, and us.
And us.
That's right.
Hi, how you doing? It's great to be here.
It's been a while since we chatted, but I really, it's so great that I've known you basically my entire puppetry career, because you do incredible work and your performing is fantastic, and we've had a chance to intersect and work on a couple of different projects over the years, which I just feel so fortunate about. We worked together on Hiroshima Maiden with Dan Herlin. We were also on his show Dis Farmer. We worked at the Metropolitan Opera in Madame Butterfly for many years on that show. And we have like a Sarah Lawrence connection because you have taught at Sarah Lawrence College.
Totally.
Not while I was there, but in the past.
Yeah.
And now you're in Chicago. You're like part of the Chicago puppetry scene, which is really cool.
Yeah, which is super surprising because I always thought it was going to be like New York forever.
Yeah.
And then about 4.5 years ago, life and relationship and family changed, and I found myself moving here. And to tell you the truth, I still am missing New York so much.
Yeah.
Because like you said, actually, I began my career basically at the same time you did, Eric. Hiroshima Maiden was my first professional puppetry show.
That's so cool.
And so many of my friends, you included, are based in New York. And anyway, I got a soft spot for the Big Apple.
I'll allow it. That's fine. Yeah. That seems right. Well, we always like to start with asking our guests about how they got interested or how they got started in puppetry. I wonder if you could tell us a little, how puppetry came into your life.
Totally. Well, first things first. Never thought that puppetry was something you could do. I mean...
You mean me? It's never something I could do? Thanks.
No, like anyone could do. Like, who thinks that? I mean, I know things were a little bit different for you, Eric.
Yeah.
But for me growing up, I was like, I had no conception,
And you grew up in Hawaii, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I grew up in Hawaii, and when I grew up in Hawaii, I was a little theater geek, so I was really into performing. Fiddler on the Roof, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat.
Yeah.
And I guess when I was 16 years old, there was this one experience which kind of hinted at what would come, but I didn't realize at the moment. And that was that when I was 16 years old, I went to the Big Island of Hawaii and did a summer drama program. And as part of this program, we worked on a Bunraku style puppet show.
That's cool.
And I was the left arm for a show called Momotaro the Peach Boy. And it was complete with this puppet and a cranky moving background to go through all the scenes.
Yeah.
It was so cool. But I had no inkling that that was something one did outside of summer on the Big Island. So so I went to college, I went to university on the mainland.
Yeah.
And went to Pittsburgh, and went to a pretty intense theater conservatory there, which I'm always so grateful for, that I had that kind of training.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't until, like a lot of folks, until I arrived in New York and was actually not even working as an actor. I was working like as a stage carpenter down at La Mama on, in the East Village, that I started seeing like just crazy puppetry, and folks doing things that was so exciting. And that kind of called me back, not only to that time in Hawaii where I, had the chance to do this 3-person puppet and really had a great experience, but also kind of the culture of Hawaii that has actually, I remembered growing up, many, many like kind of puppetry and movement kind of based like art forms that I experienced, like wayang kulit, Indonesian puppetry, and even just the cultural practices of Japan and China and Asia that are within Hawaii. And so the long story short, what happened was I was helping a puppeteer named Theodora Skipateris down at La Mama.
Yeah. And
I was building like all sorts of crazy things for her. And, it was really fun. And then she looked at me one day and she said, Tom, you're great at this. Have you ever thought about doing your own work? And I was like, what? I was like, what now? My own what now? Because I didn't have an idea that you could do that. Like I was trained as an actor. I was going to go out and like, I had an agent. I was going to get the role, inhabit the part, do the thing. I didn't realize I could be a starting place too. And that moment was where it really changed for me, because that's the moment when I met Dan Herlin, who was running the puppet lab at St. Anne's. And I began to see, I think like a lot of puppeteers do, that this awesome like confluence of performance and design, and puppetry that comes together like almost no other art form. And that's really like, gosh, since that time, I've just kind of just like, no more acting. I just want to continue to work within this crazy, wild, wonderful form, which is so diverse, it's so incredible.
Yeah.
So that's really how it started. Yeah.
That's great.
And meeting you was a big part of that. Cause like when I came onto Hiroshima Maiden, everybody else, well, for the most part, was a puppeteer. They had puppeteered before.
Yeah.
But I didn't know anything. So I was really, I was looking up to you and Matt and Chris and being like, wow, how did they do this? Like, I'm on the feet. And then I watched a video of like one of our first rehearsals, and I was like, oh my God, what am I doing with my face? Why am I acting with my face?
Yeah, there's a lot of that. Did you have a question you want to throw in there?
We had a question / comment from an anonymous viewer.
Oh yeah, my dad.
How was exactly was Eric?
A little different than me. Yeah, fair question, Pop.
I was only referring to the fact that Eric was fortunate enough, because of his parents, I'm sure,
absolutely,
to be able to be introduced to kind of the form of puppetry and know that was something from a very young person, from that he wanted to do. And I think that's different, definitely from me, because it was something definitely I discovered, but then realized that like, wow, this, for the certain type of artist, this form is just so ideal and so satisfying,
Yeah. I totally agree. So the follow-up question that I like to ask our guests is, now that you're here, what keeps you in puppetry?
Wow. Well, yeah, I think I've still been kind of continually like driven by the possibilities that can happen. It's like a form, like I said, where I see so much different type of work. Both here in the US, but also internationally. And I'm still excited about seeing the way people relate and kind of find their own voice in this. Because puppetry in some respects is like this ultimate outsider form of art. It's like something which reflects itself like in the things that you made so personally because of like your own aesthetic, and then because that's combined with performance, there's just some people doing trippy, wild, amazing things, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, people always say, and yeah, you know, puppetry is such an ancient form too, and that's true. And that's true. It is like, you know, there's something about it that harnesses like this thing about people where we like to put stories into objects and characters and figures, you know, and that's really something that's kind of a human-wide phenomenon.
Yeah.
But I do think that like nowadays, like folks are also like seeing so many possibilities for the form, and their I think vision of it is a lot less well, it just has a lot more possibilities than folks used to be able to have, you know. Maybe at least in the modern era. Back in the day, people were probably like really into puppetry because it was a major form of entertainment. But nowadays, you see it being used in all sorts of ways, in film and in dance and opera, you know, in musicals, in all sorts of ways. So I don't know. The excitement of seeing that is still driving me forward. And yeah.
That's really cool. Now I feel like you have such a unique position because you have worked with a ton of, like you said, international productions, and my sort of perception is that there are really that, you know, once you get into doing a lot of puppetry, you can really start to see the different techniques and the different approaches that people have to puppetry. And you've worked not only a lot in the American puppetry scene, but have worked with you were as a part of Warhorse and Madame Butterfly, working with UK puppeteers and their kind of technique and approach to puppetry, and studying with actual Bunraku puppeteers from Japan, trained in a completely different style and approach. And I was wondering, like, I feel like you're one of the few American puppeteers who has direct experience with the Bunraku theater and like studied directly. And you are and you have experience with the UK and American forms. What do you see as like main differences in approach to, this kind of this same human experience of interacting with puppets?
Right. Well, first of all, I feel really lucky that I've been able to do that, and to have that experience and to work with those companies, and to have that perspective, like that kind of international perspective. And I think a lot of that had to do also with being at La Mama, which was such a whirlpool of international artists coming together. But after beginning my kind of discovery that puppetry was something I wanted to do, and after working on Hiroshima Maiden, I really thought that I wanted to kind of go deeper and get some training, in these forms. And that's why I kind of drifted and then eventually chose like to actually go study in Japan. And that's really what kind of where a lot of these amazing opportunities started. And just to be clear, like, when I first went to Japan to study, I thought all Japanese puppetry was Bunraku. I thought Japan equals Bunraku. Like there's just one, and really in my travels there and my research and just beginning to get to know people, you really see also how much that community is so diverse. And there's all types of forms with all sorts of interesting kind of nuances to them. Bunraku being considered the kind of ultimate, like top form, not only like in terms of the manipulation, but because of its cultural value, right? And also just to be clear, I have spent a significant amount of time at the Bunraku National Theater and observed and watched shows, but I never really trained with those puppeteers. It's hard to do that. But my main like Japanese puppetry teacher is a man named Koryu Nishikawa. And he is a 5th generation Japanese puppet master who practices a form of Japanese puppetry, which is kind of it's kind of a cousin of the Bunraku form. As you know, the Bunraku form is a three-person style. You know, a person on the head and right arm, a person on the left hand, and then a person on the feet. Well, if you think about it, 3 persons per puppet, and you've got a show with 3 characters, you've got a lot of hotel rooms and per diems to dish out.
As any good producer will tell you.
Yes, and this was especially a vexing problem in Tokyo about 160 years ago. So, my teacher Koryu Nishikawa V, his ancestors devised a way to combine the Bunraku type of puppet and make that a one-person form by first sitting on a little rolling stool. Second, putting the feet of the puppet between your toes. And then third, devising this amazing mechanism which lets you control the head and left arm and the right arm just using 2 hands. So yeah, so here you can see the form, right? This is the Kuruma Ningyo form, and there on the on my right side of the screen, behind the puppet is Koryu Nishikawa, my teacher, operating one of those puppets. And you can see us both sitting down on the on these carts. We're wearing little tabi kind of shoes, and there are little pegs on the bottom of the feet of the puppets that we're holding between our toes.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that is really for like since 2005. That is Koryu-san is really my main kind of window into Japanese traditional theater, and it's very kind of appropriate because he actually studied at the Bunraku National Theater as a young person, even though he had his own style of tradition, because he also wanted to expand his knowledge. Mm-hmm. And just to get back to your question about how this is different from, you know, how that 3-person style is practiced. I think the biggest thing to understand about Japanese puppetry is that it's such a unique cultural phenomenon. And we in the West often see the puppetry first. We see the 3-person puppets. We're like, oh my God, it's the puppetry. It's so amazing. You see 3 people as one. Which is obvious because that's what we see first, right?
Yeah.
But Bunraku really encompasses like these 3 parts. It's the puppetry, the chanter, the narrator, and the music. And those 3 parts are really kind of what makes it such a unique form and also so culturally specific. So what is amazing about folks who are experimenting with kind of stuff inspired by that in the West is that they can apply those techniques to other theatrical situations and other kind of ways of manipulating, because it really is truly one of the most sophisticated forms of puppet manipulation that you can get to when you're working with 3 really, really highly talented puppeteers on a single puppet. The kind of movement you can get is just out of this world, right? Mm-hmm. So it's really that cultural context, I think, which is the biggest difference. I remember one of my colleagues from Britain once went to see a Bunraku play in Japan. And he commented to me a little strangely. He was like, it wasn't very realistic. And and I was like, yeah, it's not real. I mean, because there's a lot of like cultural like nuance within the performance. Some of the movements are really, really specific to kind of certain characters. There are certain conventions, like if the puppets start talking, they sit down, because when you sit down, you're talking. So there's certain things that are completely stylized and fit that form in particular, which don't necessarily translate like kind of, you know, one-to-one. And so anyway, that's, I think, the biggest thing. And that's why, I mean, we puppeteers have this kind of dorky conversation too. Like, this is why I always refer to the 3-person style as in my own work as Bunraku style, right? You know, right. And I try not, and I know people get like touchy about that and everything, but I feel like it accurately reflects like what I'm doing, because to do Bunraku, then you really have to have the whole enchilada or the whole sushi roll, whatever you want to say. It's got to
The
be
whole
all
box.
right. It's got to be all those elements, the music and the and those particular stories, you know.
Yeah.
So in my own work, out of just a sense of more knowledge over these years, and just out of respect for the form, I tend to call it Bunraku style.
Mhm.
Yeah. And even interest. Sorry if I'm going nerd out. You can,
No, this
Katie,
is it. This is the
flash
place.
Katie, flash the nerd alert sign.
I'm on standby.
Because one of the other interesting things about Japan and having traveled there and worked there is that there are also more than one 3-person puppetry company in Japan.
Uh-huh.
There's actually many all throughout the country. But the Bunraku Theater, which is based in Osaka, is the most famous, the most important, the most well-known.
Mhm.
But there are other companies in the mountains of Nagano, on the island of Awaji, even in the north part of Japan, in Hokkaido, where other companies practice this 3-person style. But they wouldn't call themselves Bunraku necessarily because they have their own company names.
Sure.
And I guess that's what it is. Bunraku is almost like a company name. It is a company name.
Yeah.
It's a trademark, you know?
Yeah. It's like
So,
saying Muppet in some ways.
Yes. Yeah, it is like saying Muppet,
It's
right?
like that's the particular cast of characters from
Right.
Muppets. Like, and
Right.
that, to say that something is Muppet style is, encompasses
It's
a much broad, throws a much broader net.
It's exactly the case. And not to get, once again, too wrapped up in kind of the I don't know, just to get too picky about it. But I think it's an important distinction because even the other 3-person puppet companies in Japan will be like, oh, we're not like the Bunraku. They're awesome. We're just doing our thing. But I'm like, well, you guys are awesome too, and so anyway, so that's in terms of Japanese puppetry, that's kind of my take on it. And
Yeah.
And like you mentioned, and at the top of this whole discussion, Western artists have looked a lot to that style and to Asia in general for inspiration. And there are certainly some amazing ways that folks have taken inspiration from that form and translated it into different Bunraku style productions.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Do you feel like there's a sense in Japan that, or do you pick up on a feeling that the folks at the Bunraku who have trained with Bunraku theater, feel a particular way about the fact that that style has become so prevalent in Western styles, or that it has been drawn from you could look at the Warhorse puppets and see a direct link to the 3-person puppetry of puppetry styles of Japan.
I think that in my experience, I feel like puppeteers acknowledge that there could be an influence, but it's also a traditional art form in Japan. Mm-hmm. So they're if I was to call something Bunraku style, even that would be a little bit confusing, because once again, they are thinking about Bunraku not just as the puppetry, but as all those artistic elements, the voice and the music being an essential part of it, and that type of storytelling. So I definitely think they see the influence, and certainly I remember my teacher's brother commenting about Julie Taymor's one of her animal puppets in Lion King having the head control that does that, which is also an element of some Japanese traditional puppetry, and noticing that,
right,
But I definitely think there's because there's not a huge tradition of a non-traditional adult puppetry in Japan. Mm-hmm. Most folks are it's a little bit confusing if you were to call something Bunraku style. They'd be like,
sure,
oh, so who's the shamisen player?
right.
Isn't it kind of, weren't you saying at one point it's a little bit similar to opera in that way, where like traditional opera, where there's the canon and there's 20 different shows that everyone knows, and they kind of if you do them in a traditional fashion, they get played in kind of the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's
variations on that are met with some resistance in general.
that's very true, Katie. And I'd say, yeah, there is a specific canon of plays. It's not like the Bunraku Theater is devising new work, although I have seen a couple examples of them pushing the envelope.
Uh-huh.
But once again, these are forms which, which are handed down, not necessarily always from father to son, but from a master to a disciple.
Right.
And so that's the challenge, I think, with any kind of traditional performing art, is there's a desire to preserve it and to kind of maintain what makes it so awesome and amazing. At the same time, there's a challenge to live in 2021.
Right.
Right? Japan is like a super, like, highly technically, advanced society, and very few people choose to like go in to study traditional arts, much less Bunraku, much less any of the other smaller ones. So
yeah,
within that whole amazing tradition, there are also challenges and some discussions about how the theater can move forward and bring in new people. That same thing happens in Western opera,
yeah.
where when you and I did, Madama Butterfly for the first time, people were like, puppets and Madama Butterfly? That's blasphemy.
Yeah, I feel like people walked out. I mean,
yeah,
maybe not just for the puppets, but there were definitely some. I always feel like opera fans are kind of the original fanboys. Like, I can see a lot of parallels between them and comic book fans, which is like, this is who this character is, and any variation from that is like, that's not what we do.
Right.
But at the same time, you're right. You have to stay relevant, and you have to, there's some sense of innovation for the sense of staying fresh, or like making sure that people continue to come see the shows.
Yeah.
Which is great, because that's a ton of what you do, and in integrating new technologies and bringing, like integrating styles and techniques from these traditions into your work and into the new things that you do. I know that you do a ton of projection work and sort of integrating that. I think you might have been the first person that I knew that was like calling yourself a projection designer.
Oh, wow.
It's like, I remember really distinctly, like, this is a thing. This is going to be a thing. And then like seeing the work that you were doing in some of your earlier shows, and then seeing that kind of blow up in the theater world at large, and that projection designer is now a thing that like there is a real need for, and that there's a lot of really amazing artists working with that medium.
Right. It's true, Eric. And it's also like, the same thing can be said for puppet designer, or puppetry designer or puppetry director.
Yeah.
It used to be that could be just a prop,
Right.
But I think people are seeing, like, if you're going to really use it to its full extent, devising it in a way that really works, not just because it's new and shiny, but because it serves the story.
Yes.
It's definitely a specialty, and
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I was at a meeting of set designers, and they were talking. Myself and a couple of other puppet designers were brought in to talk about like how, like, best practices for incorporating puppetry and things like that. And someone made the case of, well, it's just like projection design wasn't the thing you knew you needed before, 10, 15 years ago.
Right.
And someone chimed in that like costume design has followed that same path, that like it used to be you wouldn't need a costume designer on a show because every actor brought their own costumes.
Right. Or because the set designer did everything, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's just becoming one or more of those specialty fields that it really pays to have someone who's just focusing on that. Did you want to throw something in there too?
Yeah, we have a good question here from Jess.
Oh, hi, Jess. On the same note, Tom's conversation with Coreyson about folks in the West experimenting with cart puppetry. Oh yeah.
We're going back a little bit, but
yeah. How does your teacher feel about people experimenting with cart puppetry and bringing those traditions into newer forms?
Well, he, like I said, is he, and I don't think I mentioned this, but he is actually particularly like a kind of very open person for being a Japanese traditional master.
Uh-huh.
And part of this is because as a young person, he spent like a year in Sweden with the Swedish Marionette Theater, like as a puppeteer and training them, you know, and showing his technique. And he's traveled to like, you know, over 45 countries just touring with his own company. And he's had students from all over the world, you know, including me. I'm not the only one who's ever studied that form.
Sure.
So I feel like Coreyson is really, really open to it. And I also feel that he, like any traditional artist, has this big burden on his back of carrying forward the tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And once he mentioned to me, you know, I also feel like I kind of put in the time and the dedication to let him know that I was dedicated to kind of studying this really intensely and not just as a fad. So I think he also appreciated that, at least from my angle.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember he also said, "Hey, Tom, you know, you can use these tools and you can experiment with them, and I'm happy for you to learn what you can from me."
Mm-hmm.
But he said, for me, I am in a kind of box, and there are restrictions and places things that I cannot do because I have to carry forward this form, you know, and so I think he was very astute about knowing what he has to do as a person who's really kind of a central pivot point of an ongoing tradition, and also kind of being open enough to folks who get inspired by his work and also then take it forward. Hmm. And so once again, I think if people decide to do card puppetry and they're really into that, I think he's supportive. Mm-hmm. If they're going to call it like Hachioji Kuruma Ningyo, which is his company's name, I think he's like, well, that's not exactly my company's work, right? So why don't you call it card puppet style or Kuruma Ningyo style, right?
Yeah.
So one other thing. Sorry, I'm talking so much because I'm nerding so out, but
this is it.
I'm so far out nerded. That Koryu-san, I think, realizes also that the importance of engaging young people.
Uh-huh.
And so just this year in his traditional company, he has elevated 3 new young puppeteers, including his son, and given them their stage names, which is a very, very big thing in Japan to get your first stage name. Cool. And he's also embarked on this, he's continually teaching younger folks and elementary school kids and having summer camps of the puppetry style. He's really engaged with trying to make sure that it just doesn't peter out. And that takes a lot of work and a lot of dedication and pushing it forward. So, I don't want to speak for him, but I would say that he would be happy if people are bringing more visibility to the form.
Sure. Do you feel like now, having studied with him, or just now being a puppeteer who is also a teacher, do you feel any of the same kind of responsibility to like carry forward the things that you've learned?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I want to when I'm with students, I try to let them know that there are many traditions like in this world, and before we jump like headlong into them, we should also find out a little bit about how they came to be, the forces that created them, the history, even the language, about how these things come about. And I do feel a responsibility to Coreyson, and I also frequently. And when I first was making work, would ask him, Sensei, I want to make this work and I want to use the style. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah. So, and with students, I think, puppetry is such a humongous like learning curve, right? Sure. And in all different types of forms. And so I feel like just being educated to the fact that there are all these different types, not only in Japan and Asia, but all over the world, these forms, is a really, really important thing for you to get a broad, like, kind of idea about why people do that and what is possible, what is possible. So
I feel like it's especially what you're saying about, learning the history of the tradition really rings true, especially when there are a lot of conversations in the theater, especially these days, about cultural appropriation
Right.
and representation, and like whose traditions are yours to take and use, and what techniques are yours to take and use, and
Right.
what's the best way to go about that. Do you think about that when you're making new work?
Absolutely, and it's a really important conversation. I am an American artist. I happen to be Asian American, but I'm still coming from this cultural soup and world, which is our art world. So when I approach this work, because I have also had conversations about this very topic, about when one is appropriating or just copying or stealing, all those kind of issues. For me, it's important once again to just educate yourself as completely as you can. So you're not just responding to the first impulse, which of course is a natural one, which is, wow, that's cool, I want to do that. Yes. And so, and then so one is just educating yourself, and then the other part is about seeking out knowledge, and also just trying to kind of get closer to the source, and definitely I have a very kind of lucky happenstance that I met this teacher, that we began to trust each other, and that he's been a friend and a collaborator, and that can't happen to everyone, right? Mm-hmm. But I think when you do push forward with making work, and you're thinking about how it should be performed, or the aesthetic which informs it, or what brings it onto stage, I feel like you really have to do your research and make sure that you're approaching it in as honest and open a way as you can. Mm-hmm. And I think particularly in this, in what is happening in the country, and this goes through all, elements of our society, a recognition of folks who have been mistreated and abused and sidelined, is really, really important, especially for us as artists, to kind of understand and look deeper about. So I don't know if there's any great easy solution out there, but I do think approaching the work with respect, thinking about your motivations, and also making sure that you're doing your research and connecting with folks with whom know the tradition, those are important parts if you're going to be exploring work which is a part of a cultural tradition of somebody that is different from you. Yeah,
I think what you say, that first impulse about something being wow, this is really cool, I want that, I want to use that, I feel like it's so great in the puppetry community that it is encouraged that you should try things that you want to try, and you should try out ideas and techniques, and bring something to the table in terms of what you think is interesting, and to tell your story. Right. And I think it's also worth noting that doing your homework on that is so it deepens the enjoyment of that thing. Yeah. And it can make that feeling of wow be so much deeper and so much more interesting. And in our work as puppeteers, it's all about making connections between all of these things that bring us together as people, and doing that research about where those techniques come from, and who developed them, and why, and what's the cultural context, can really be just an infinite mine of more information and more, just more sauce for the dish about what can be made, which I think is just a really exciting part of making new work and trying new things.
Totally. And I think that, you can really see when that work's been done, and you can really kind of feel it. And you're right, it does enrich the experience, not only for yourself, but for the whole community. I want to tell everybody about Coreyson, because I think he's amazing, and every time I try any opportunity I can to kind of get him out there, and when we're touring together to just showcase that. It's also interesting because so many puppet treasures are in a way these kind of hidden away gems, which it takes folks who are interested and willing to do the work to kind of pull out of the rough and make people realize like how amazing these things are. So
Yeah.
It's definitely, and I think another thing which I always appreciate about your work, Eric, is that it's also the way that you approach the work. I think there's in our field, playing with dolls, there's there's a sense of joy and life giving, which matters, about how we conduct ourselves, and working in that positive kind of way is also another kind of element of this, and something that
I think the same is true for you too. Like some of the work that you do, it really, like, you're just one of the most joyful people that I know. And like, it doesn't mean that your work is saccharine or light. Like you have some really amazing work about some really dark subjects, and like you have a real depth to your work, but it comes from that place of play, and it comes from that joy of discovery. And I think that you're right. Like you can really tell when that work has been done. It really shows in the final product, which I think is just great.
And isn't that play that you're talking about, isn't that like one of the most amazing things about what we do, right?
Yeah.
Because I really think that as much as you would want to like choreograph everything and like get every movement down to the exact minute moment, sometimes you discover the most amazing things as a puppeteer by allowing play, by allowing people to goof off and release and just find something that happens organically in the moment, right?
Yeah.
Something that is so much more, thank you, Jessica.
Yeah, Jess totally agrees, absolutely.
Something that is so much realer and deeper than you could have, quote unquote, planned, right?
Yeah.
And that element is like an essential part, I think, about what puppeteers like do. And once again, I'll bring this back to you and my fellow puppeteers on that first project, because I remember watching like Chris Green like play with a piece of tissue on the dinner table, and animate a piece of tissue, and I'm like, just blowing my mind, because I'm like, there is a live piece of tissue on the table, and this is one of those things about puppetry, which is that spark, we talk about it's magic or whatever, but it's that spark about ingesting like a bit of life into the inanimate. And that happens because we're free enough not to be self-conscious of it at our age, and also, to kind of be open to play. So I think that's an essential part of any puppeteer's repertoire.
Yeah.
That reminds me of the salt and pepper shakers at Chris's house.
Well, as some of the audience might know, I did live with Chris Green for for a couple of years, actually, right around Hiroshima Maiden and thereafter, and so Katie got to experience playing with salt and pepper shakers at the dinner table.
Every time we would sit at the table and we'd be waiting for whatever to be ready, or we were just having coffee in the morning or something. If the two of you were there together and there was a lull in the conversation, you would just start talking through salt and pepper shakers.
Well, yeah, I think, and just to make that a perk of the job, I feel like
you can write that off.
Yeah, exactly.
That's tax deductible.
I mean, what you're talking about, like getting to that place of play, that's it doesn't come easily. Like it takes work to get there. Yeah. Or it takes practice to get there, I would say. Yeah. And I feel like oftentimes I think this is why children respond to puppetry more, and why then puppetry develops a reputation for being for kids, is that there's a shorter pathway to that play, to that state of play and make believe. Right. And I think it's just, that's great. It's so much more satisfying when adults get there and are welcomed there. Where you get to that point where the audience is playing with you and with the puppets, like in this very participatory way, is an incredible means for communication and an
Yeah.
incredible means for contact, and like can really have a huge impact. It's just a great tool for connecting with people.
Totally. And I think it's really true. And that's also another aspect of like doing international work, which is so cool with puppetry, is that the language of puppetry, at least figurative puppetry, is understandable sometimes beyond language, you know. So we can sense what the puppet is doing or the figure is doing and laugh with them, whether we speak Japanese or English, you know, in certain situations. So definitely that identification is something that identification of something human happening there is something that we respond to.
Yeah. Do you feel like it is, I mean, unless they sit down to talk, in which case we're totally lost, but
right, monologue.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that like the movements are like culturally, they are also culturally bound, you know, that in the Japanese styles, and I'm trying to think if that's true in American puppetry, as young as it is. Like, is that, do you feel like that has some analog in what American puppetry is doing?
I don't think to the same degree. Like, I think like Japan is much more of a homogenous like society with a homogenous cultural history than the U.S. And so I don't think that's quite true, but you know, in doing puppetry for kids and even some adults, I know there's certain puppet moves that will always get a laugh. For example, the elevator, or the going down the stairs.
Oh yes.
You know, so
parts always get a good laugh.
Yeah.
That transcends cultural boundaries.
But I wouldn't say there's any like you know, I don't know if there would be specifically some certain types of movements, because even for the Japanese traditional theater, like also it's capturing like the Edo era, like 300 years ago, right? So even for modern Japanese, they're like, oh, that was the way people behaved, you know. So there is there is even like, you know, kind of that distance in there, you know. So anyway, it's fascinating and but yeah, and an endless source for me of actually learning kind of new things about the whole trajectory of it.
Yeah. Did you want to throw
I was just thinking, it's a totally different style, obviously, but vaudeville might be the American equivalent.
Sure.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah.
I mean, it's not exactly one for one, but that idea of like when this type of person comes on stage, or this kind of move happens, the audience knows what's coming or what to do.
Right.
And I would say probably to some extent, like the Italian mask style, the comedian characters.
Yeah.
Like those characters aren't by name in American theater, in American puppetry in the same way, but by character. Like you can immediately recognize those archetypes, and because of a long tradition of, you know, our theater history.
Yeah.
But it's and that is certainly like movement based. I think specifically, like, I don't know. I was also thinking of just like Muppet moves that have permeated, that are like now, like, you know, like when a Muppet finishes a scene and they're like, you know, like laughing about the scene that they just did. Like that's a move that's so specific and is really like not connected. It's connected specifically to Muppets, which is also connected specifically to vaudeville and like the variety show. But like that move, you can trace the lines through all Muppet style stuff and how people perform that style, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I guess that is an example of it, and yeah, it would be interesting to kind of detail like some of these classic puppetry moves in the West, or at least in America, which are like archetypal, you know. But yeah.
Well, yeah, I guess give us a couple more 100 years, because
yeah, we need a little more time.
Japan's got. I mean, the Bunraku theater, it's like, you know, you were saying it's Edo era, which is like 300 years old. Does it predate that as well? Does it come before like No theater and Kabuki theater?
Those forms are a bit older than the three-person puppetry style. And full disclosure, I am not a Japanese theater like scholar,
Totally
but
fair.
if you go, like if you go to Japan, you can see, and there's so many countries like this, you can see why it would evolve into a puppet kingdom. You know, because when you go to Japan, there are so many figures. There's just figures everywhere. It's a country in which figures are a part of the cultural practice. And that's both like temple figures and figures alongside the road, or like construction automatons waving to say, don't drive here, or like, you know, models of Gojira and Mothra and like, you know, and little anime figures. So it's, it has to do, I think, with the figure first. And as far as, you know, my teacher has told me, that goes really, really way back to even creating a figure or a doll back in prehistory of a child or a baby, so that the sickness will go to the doll and not to the real child. You know what I mean? So kind of those type of things. But yeah, the specifics of exactly how long the three-person style has been, I can't totally speak to, but it's yeah, No is probably the oldest of those forms. Yeah. Last interesting fun fact too is that during the heyday of the Bunraku Theater in Osaka, often the kabuki actors would come to see the puppets perform, to see not only the movement, but to hear the narration. And so there was like a kind of competition, unending competition, not only between the human theater and the puppet theater, but also other puppet companies that would try to steal special effects or faces dropping off or rolling eyes, you know. So it was born out of like a real, like a big soup of innovation where people were trying like things and doing that to try to get audience into their theaters.
I mean, it sounds very familiar.
Yeah.
You know? the soup of innovation.
Yes.
That's incredible. Well, I feel like, you know, you're at the forefront of that in incorporating new styles of that soup. You're the leader of the soup, Tom.
I need a bigger spoon. I've got this tiny puppet spoon, but it's a little small.
It works.
Perfect.
Well, now you're working on a new piece that's going to be released soon. Is that correct? That's
right. I'm super excited. This piece is going to come out in April, but you know, everyone in the puppetry world during the pandemic has made a puppet film, and so have I. But this was quite a special project, because right at the beginning of the pandemic, I was approached by Ralph Pena, who's the artistic director of Mai Theater Company in New York, and he really was trying to create a project not just for puppets, but that could support his actors in New York, because, as you know, so many people lost work, right? Yeah. And Ralph basically came to me and said, Tom, you know, I'm writing a play. I want my actors to record it on Zoom, because I want to make sure they can work and give them work, but we can't get together in a theater. Do you think you could do a one-person puppet show with all of their voices? Okay. And I was like, let me see the script. And I was like, I think we're gonna need more people. Anyway, long story short, we devised this film, which we shot in a socially distanced manner about 1 hour north of here in Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. And it's a puppet play based on a story that Ralph Pena wrote about an Asian American family living in the Western United States. And all the voices, there's 5 main characters, were voiced by New York actors who once again recorded and rehearsed online on Zoom. And me and my company here in New York built these puppets, each in our pandemic studios, and then got together for a very intensive filming and rehearsal process, which is going to end up with this 40-minute film that's opening next month. So it's a really cool piece, because it is kind of adult puppetry, but the puppets, which are designed by Chicago artist KT Shivak, are just gorgeous figures. And it's much more verbal than a lot of the work that I do in my own work. Like there's actually like lines, and people talking. So, so that is also a really, really fascinating thing to explore how that works in a puppet film. But the film is called Vancouver, and it's coming out in April. It'll be streamed, I believe, for free by my theater company as part of this initiative to kind of get their, hey, thank you, Katie. Yeah, as part of their initiative to get this work out there. And not only was it awesome to make a film that detailed and complete, and it was lit so beautifully, but it also felt so good to try to, as Ralph said, give people work, give artists work, and we know that this time has been so challenging for so many artists. And so to have been a small part of that, as the puppet, the puppet team and the director was just amazing. So I hope you can check it out. And yeah, those probably in the coming days, some new announcements with the trailer and whatnot coming out.
Awesome. Well, it's just great. I can't wait to see it. And I always look forward to the stuff that you do. It's so cool. It's like, I love all of the projections and shadows and like mixing of styles that you put in. It's really so amazing. And so great that we got you on the show today. I'm really happy to have you here.
Yeah, it's so amazing. Thanks for letting me nerd out completely.
This is the place. Around here, we just call it out.
We just call it out. I'm out.
It's just it. This is just small talk. Well,
no, Eric,
Tom,
like
it's
I
great
said,
having you on the show. I can't wait to see what you're up to next. And hopefully we'll get a chat again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, my friend. And keep doing what you're doing. Thank you, Katie.
Yay.
We'll see you soon.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Well, huge thanks to Tom Lee. If you want to check out more of his stuff, you can go to his website, tomleeprojects.com. He's got some incredible past work on there that you can see. As speaking of past work, you can also check out our work at puppetkitchen.com and on Instagram at The Puppet Kitchen. We started this show on Instagram Live, so we love pointing people back there. We're really active, mostly on Instagram. If you want to pick out, or if you want to pick yourself out some PK swag, we've got a cool puppet swag store, PK merch store. So go there. And if you would like to support this show in a direct way, we have a new Patreon page, patreon.com/puppetkitchen. And for a low monthly subscription, you can help this show and help us continue to get more incredible interviews like Tom Lee and to talk about the puppetry community. I think that pretty much covers everything. It's been great having you. Thank you so much. Thanks again to Tom Lee. If you like, make sure to like and subscribe this video and share it with your friends. We'll be back next Wednesday at 2 o'clock Eastern time, right in the middle of the week. And just remember, until next time, you don't have to do everything to do something. We'll see you next time.